That was our last festival that we ever did, which I think was 2009 maybe, and yeah, it was quite funny. We put Underworld on, and we were just so happy because I'd seen Underworld at Big Day Out one year, and it was one of the best, live music experiences of my life. But I remember standing in the Hordern Pavilion, and they were the last act on the bill, and it was virtually empty. We knew that we had lost everything, by the way. Like, events are like that. You're like, that you're going down the tubes, right?
Declan Lee remembers it in Technicolor, securing his favourite act Underworld to finally play at his music festival, the bass driving through his sweaty body, but knowing at the same time his money was gurgling down the drain because none of the other music fans wanted to watch Underworld. They were next door watching a Japanese DJ who threw cake at people. And I guess sometimes that's business for you. 1 minute you're hot, the next, you're cleaning cake off a floor. But Declan Lee saw that curveball through to then dabble in restaurants and even a TV show before finally becoming one of 4 owners of the famous Messina gelato chain. From Dead Set Studios, this is Curveball and I'm Kelly Reardon. In the 1990s, Australia's dance music scene was really hotting up. And as a DJ, Declan Lee had timed a return from London perfectly. But that same timing was not so perfect for his day job as a physiotherapist. So how did he go from physio to DJ to restaurateur to music festival promoter and finally to co-owning one of the world's coolest gelati businesses, Gelato Messina? Declan Lee, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
First of all, just take me back to the physical therapy rooms at St Vincent's Hospital where you were working as a physio, and presumably late nights at the club weren't really working with those early shifts.
Oh, look, they did for a while. I was pretty young back then, but there definitely came a time where, I was sort of DJing from Thursday till Sunday/Monday morning. Had to be at rounds with a team of plastic surgeons because they were the ones that did all the hand surgery and I was a hands physio. And I had to be on rounds at like 6:45 or 7 o'clock, and I was rolling out of clubs at 6 a.m. and it was, wasn't great. I wasn't at my peak, shall we say.
Of course, you wanted to study physio, so how difficult was the decision then to let that go as a career and to move into a kind of a risky business, music?
There was just a lot of pressure, I think, that I put on myself that, you study all this time. I'd done sports science, I'd done half of another degree and then physio, which was a very difficult degree. And you get to the end of it and you go, well, I really should be a physio, right? Because that's what I did. But my heart was sort of telling me that that's not what I wanted to do. So, you're also faced with this kind of, whether it's a moral or ethical dilemma where what am I doing here? I'm should be helping people. That's what I chose to do. And yet I'm getting paid 4 times the amount of money to DJ and play music, and everyone pisses in your pocket and tells you you're great, and, you're actively encouraged to drink on the job. So, it's a great time, but it's a really weird, I don't know if it's even a moral question. It's just this weird scenario where you go, I really should be rewarded in this world for looking after people better. But I was on something like as a new, 40 grand a year or something like that. And, everyone in the physio department, no one ever thanked you for anything, and your boss never got thanked, and you're in public health, and all you get to do is asked to do more for less. So at some point you'd have to decide whether you want to be there for you, and it's what you want to do, or you're going to do something fun or better for your soul.
So you start putting on parties and you start working with Ministry of Sound as an artist and repertoire director. And it's a pretty cool time because this is the early 2000s. Dance music's really taking off. Ministry's really taking off. Can you give me a sense of what it was like in the industry in that moment in particular?
Look, it was really exciting. I think the dance music thing, the electronic music thing was really starting to cross over. In the UK, most of the top 10 records were electronic or dance type music, a lot of parties going on, DJing everywhere. You know, it was good fun, and you could actually start making a career out of it. If not career, but you could make money out of it. I don't think everyone thought career was just, can I make some money and make a living and not have to get a real job.
So that leads you to starting your own music festival and events business called Sounds. How clear was your vision when you first set out to put that event together?
Completely and utterly unclear, to be honest. I had left ministry and I didn't really know. I've had this many times in my life. I actually had no idea what I was going to do. You know, I was probably even 30 years old, which at the time you think you're too old to do anything, right? And I just fell into touring quite a big DJ from overseas because I knew his manager. And then I started going, okay, well, I could be a touring agent. I can tour artists here and I can sell them to other promoters and I know what I'm doing there. And so I started doing that and then got involved with these guys doing Sounds, and we were putting on club nights. This thing called Sounds on Sunday, which is quite big as a weekly club night. And all of a sudden we found ourselves doing bigger sort of large scale events.
And what about some of the other festivals that had started popping up? How much competition did you have?
It was just growing. We never really thought of it as competition, and we just sort of fell into it. You know, we bought Deep Dish off a promoter in Melbourne to do the Sydney show. We knew it was going to be bigger than, 2,000 people. So we did it at the Hordern and it was 6,000 people. And we realised that if we built a brand around that, we could do a festival. So we made this little festival, and within a few years we had a 25,000 person festival in Sydney. And once you have a festival of that size in Sydney, suddenly you want to control the artists that you put on the lineup. So then you start touring people, and then you have to put on events in other cities, in Melbourne, Brisbane, Perth, and suddenly you're extended. Instead of doing one festival, you're doing 5. It just grows out of nowhere.
And this is also the time where other festivals are taking off. You've got the Big Day Out coming along. You've probably got Splendour in the Grass starting up. How did that start to impact on the festival you were running?
I mean, everyone was growing exponentially, and everyone was doing multiple cities, multiple dates across multiple weekends. And so the money that started flying around was just absolutely huge. And, we always knew that we were the smallest player in the big end of the field. And I think inherently we knew that unless we didn't even look that far ahead. I think we just knew that we just had to keep running on the treadmill, and then I think everything fell apart for us at some point.
How do you bankroll all of this? Because at the height, people like Fatboy Slim, big electronic artists from the UK and the US, Prodigy, whoever's coming out, they want big bickies, right?
Yeah, huge. How you bankrolled it changed over time, right? And in the early years, you bankrolled your festivals with ticket money that came in, and you would sell to your promoters, who were the guys on the street that sold to their mates, and money would come in and you use that to bankroll the next thing. And it really was you can't do it anymore because all the big ticketing agencies hold on to your money, which is the right thing to do. But we did deals where we could get some of the money out of the ticketing agencies. We had guys on the street selling tickets, and so you would fund it. But then, the artist money, the cost of everything just started to explode, and it was it was quite hard. It's all a great big Ponzi scheme, events. Yeah.
So there's one artist, though, that you always wanted to have to play at your festival, and it's a name that anyone who went to a club in the 2000s or watched the film Trainspotting probably knows, which is Underworld. Yeah,
we got them eventually. That was our last festival that we ever did, which I think was 2009 maybe, and yeah, it was quite funny. We put Underworld on, and we were just so happy because I'd seen Underworld at Big Day Out one year, and it was one of the best, live music experiences of my life. And we put them on, and yeah, I remember standing in the Hordern Pavilion, and they were the last act on the bill, and they were in there, and it was virtually empty. And we knew that we had lost everything, by the way. Events are like that. That you're going down the tubes, right? Inherently early, and we knew that was all over, and I'm sitting there just going, just enjoy it, that you've got Underworld here playing at your festival. But the room was empty, and all the kids were outside, crushed into some really small room trying to listen to Steve Aoki, who, for me, the music was awful. Yeah, it was just one of those, I'll never forget that moment, I could tell you.
So that's another artist who's playing down the street?
Yeah, no, he's playing in another. It was at our festival, playing in another room and playing music that I just hated. But we put this on because we knew that the kids loved it, right? That made us feel really old. But it was one of those defining moments where you kind of realise that it wasn't what you signed up for, you know what I mean, the music, and, you know, it had grown into a business rather than what we loved.
So what was your undoing once sound started to go bust? Was it overextension? Was it betting on that wrong musical act? I mean, it's like reading tea leaves.
Oh, yeah, it's gambling. It's basically gambling. And the festival game was exploding and it was growing too fast, and it was a race to the bottom. Everyone wanted market share. So the amount of money that people were paying for the big acts was far greater than what those artists could put bums on seats, right? So you were paying $1 million for a DJ that played 3 gigs or something. It was just that you would have to fluff up your entire lineup so it looked like a big festival. And I just think everything was overpriced. And there were so many festivals on. It felt like every month there was something on, and there was only a certain, like, people just couldn't go to every festival. So then they started choosing, and our festival was in winter as well. So it was one of the only festivals in winter. We just couldn't own any other dates because it was already so crowded. And, you know, I think the writing was on the wall for us that we knew at some point we couldn't sustain it.
Did you think about going back to physio? Because the first thing you often do when you make a mistake or something kind of goes wrong is you go back to what you know. Yeah,
I don't think I did. I can't remember, but I'm pretty sure I didn't do that. I think I would have felt like that was more failure, to be honest. I've never been that sort of person where I go, oh, that didn't work, I'll go back to something, you know. That would have felt like even more failure.
So Declan Lee's in his 30s. He's gone from fixing people's hands as a physiotherapist to DJing to then building a music touring empire with his own 2 hands. So how does he pick himself up, dust himself off and start selling gelati? From Dead Set Studios, this is Curveball. Things weren't looking so good for Declan Lee. The physio turned music promoter had just had his company go belly up. So how does he end up at Gelato Messina, a cult food business with more than 20 stores across the country? Declan, business is all about who you know. And so you already have your finger in a whole lot of other pies, including some restaurants. Were they bringing in much money for you?
Yeah, not too bad, actually. I was lucky that I had done that before the festival thing went under. And it wasn't actually, you know, the financial investment. It was just that, like you said, it's kind of who you know. And I had invested in a restaurant with I guess you call him my brother's brother-in-law, in a restaurant called Tavola. And so I had a connection there. And the other 2 guys that were in that restaurant were Danny and Nick, who are my current business partners in Messina. And so I had created this relationship with them. And the 4th kind of member of Messina now, Donato, was our head chef at that restaurant as well. And he came over. So it was, as you say, it wasn't the financial investment that was important. It was the investment in the people that led to where I am today.
And the other thing that happens at this time is you're going pretty well with the restaurant, but you have this other dream. So tell me about Australia's greatest athlete.
Australia's greatest disaster. I mean, that was one of those things again, the timing's a bit weird, but I can't remember. But I think I'd sold out of a Tavola, the restaurant at that time. I seem to remember that it was about when I was having my first child as well. And I basically took all the money that I got from my share in that restaurant and decided it was like leaving the casino and putting everything on red. How
did you come across this TV show and what was it all about?
It was like an early version of American or Australian Ninja Warrior. It was this, you know, competing over a course with different types of athletes. And so this original concept was like, you know, rugby league players and rugby union players and soccer players and tennis players, and they would all compete to do these sort of weird and wacky sports tasks. And it was sponsored by Rexona, and it had 2 seasons on TV, and, you know, seemed like such a sure bet.
It does seem like a good bet in retrospect when we think about SAS Australia on TV, Ninja Warrior, as you mentioned. how did it collapse? And can you give me a sense of, did you lose the lot? Because you'd put all your restaurant money in.
Yeah, I did. I lost. Yeah, I lost all of that money. It fell. I don't really know how it fell apart. I wasn't driving it. It was being driven by this guy who had driven it from the beginning. So we were a little bit detached from it. And he was a good. I think he was pretty good at what he did. But something I don't even know what happened. I wasn't involved enough in it to understand. But Rexona pulled out of it, so there was no funding, and the thing just organically fell apart. There was some issues with the trademark and who owned it, and it just started to get pretty, not dirty as in a battle, but everything about the whole thing was just too hard.
You're already intertwined with the Messina guys, as you mentioned. When did you decide to make it official and go into that business?
From what I remember, all of my festival stuff went sort of tits up, but I was still spending a lot of time with these guys. We owned a Thai restaurant, we owned 2 Italian restaurants, and on the side, I was doing social media for the restaurants. And at that stage, there wasn't, I know it sounds stupid now, but people weren't leveraging social media heavily for restaurants. And as a joke, we always take the piss out of each other. I think just as a joke, Nick said to me, why don't I pay you a couple $100 a week to do all the social for everything because you haven't got a job? And I went, yeah, right, I'll take what I can get.
And what was in your mind? I find this really interesting because how do you make ice cream, gelato, go viral on social media before this whole foodie culture on Instagram?
I think it's just good timing, right? We had a product that, we never set out to do specials every week, which is what we do now, but we just, over the time, we'd put specials in, and Donato started doing one special a week. And, I had this product that, unlike a restaurant, was changing all the time. It was high quality. It was stuff that people were excited about. It was just this perfect product to talk about from a social media point of view. And everything just clicked, I think. But, we always say to each other as well, the 4 of us that are in this business, I don't think any of us could have done what we've done without each other. It was the sum of all the parts, I think.
So you start to build Messina from one popular ice cream shop in Sydney into this massive company that it is today, about 20 stores across the country. I think you have them overseas now as well. What was it that made your gelati store so wildly successful?
Again, it's the sum of all the parts, right? So I just out of pure, just because I was a DJ and I happened to be into deep house and electronic music, I started just curating the playlist, and the guys, Nick and Danny were also just happened to be into that style of music. And so I started playing that music. Donato was a chef, so he started coming from an angle of creating flavors from a chefy point of view, whereas Nick was a real ice cream scientist guy, right? And then Danny, his brother, had come from Adelaide, and he had seen that Nick was pretty tired running the business, and he banned him from front of house. And Danny just was this guy that just really cared about customer service. He wasn't traditionally from a customer service background, but he inherently knew what it meant to feel welcome in a shop. And we added all this stuff together, and suddenly we had this place that was selling great product. The service was amazing. And the vibe when you walked into it wasn't a bright, kiddie gelato store. It was like a nightclub. And I think that resonated with a lot of people.
When did you start to grow beyond the initial 1 or 2 stores, Darlinghurst and Bondi in Sydney?
We've grown very slowly, to be fair. I mean, one of the things that we haven't done was get investment from, we've been courted by pretty much every private equity firm in Australia. We've been courted by big business that want to be part of what we do, but we've never taken that money. So we've always grown relatively slowly. I think because we're a bit older, we've kind of always wanted to control everything. We've all had business failures, and I think we're a little bit more mature that allowed us to not rush the growth, which was important to, I think, our success.
And how do the other stores work beyond those first few? Are they franchised out, or do you own them all?
We own all of them, yeah.
And what makes you go into a particular shopping centre, strip, how do you choose where you should put the next gelato store in Brisbane, Adelaide, Melbourne?
I mean, it's changed over time, but we have always tried to pick marginally grungy areas that we felt were up and coming, rather than the hot suburb at the time. I suppose the best example I can give in Sydney is, the Redfern versus Surrey Hills, or the Fitzroy versus, Smith Street versus Brunswick Street. At the time, it was like, I remember when we opened our store in Melbourne, and I remember the day we opened, and it felt like it was like, tumbleweeds coming down the street, and I thought, what the have we done, But it made sense to open somewhere that was a little bit dirty and a little bit, people love this idea of finding Messina. I think things have changed for us now. We're a bit more, people know a lot more about us, but at that time it was this discovery piece where people were like, oh, have you found, Messina? It's on Smith Street, it's this amazing store, and,
What about the decision to go overseas? You attempted to move into China. How did that go?
It was an interesting, it was an opportunistic play, to be honest. You always learn from these mistakes, but it was just someone had come to us with a fair bit of money, and had convinced us that it was the right thing to do. But in short, we basically opened in a shopping centre in a country town with 9 million people. It was kind of weird, and it just our brand doesn't really translate. It's very cosmopolitan, I suppose, city-based, urban-based. People don't understand it otherwise. It didn't make any sense. There was this, place in China where there was like 6-lane highways coming into this place with a shopping centre, and people were riding horse and carts into the town. It was very weird.
And what about LA or Las Vegas or some of the places that you decided to try in America? How was your strategy going into that move?
Again, there wasn't a lot of strategy. That was also an opportunistic play where we knew someone that was opening up over there, and they were going to bankroll the whole thing. And we ended up opening in on the west side of LA, sort of on the edge of the desert, a place called Summerlin. Wasn't on the Strip, and I don't know, we just got caught up. Obviously when you go over there and the property developers, they sell you this dream. They're building a stadium and all this, residential, and it's going to be this, and it's going to be that, and they built this huge shopping centre, and there was really kind of not really many people there. It was just a bit too early. They didn't build the residential. Basically, it was too early, and it wasn't city enough for us. The brand couldn't develop. The only way you could make it work in those places is if people walk up to you and you sell ice cream and it's like colourful and kiddie and all that sort of stuff. Our brand was a bit too complicated for that.
So Las Vegas doesn't really work, China doesn't really work, but you've now just opened in Hong Kong, Declan.
Yes, and that's working, thankfully.
What's the difference?
Well, it's just the understanding of a brand and how it resonates with people. In Summerlin, it was like it's a residential kind of part of Vegas where locals would live. I don't know. I think you need to have people that understand our brand, and I think Hong Kong, which has only been open for a couple of weeks, is a really good example of when we've opened. Pretty much everyone that has gone there has been to our stores in Australia, right? And they tell all their friends, and there's hype associated with it. And then once you deliver the product to them and they get it, their friends get it, it's very easy to maintain that customer. It's very easy to get them on board and not lose them.
How much do you focus on that in the ongoing part of the business? Now that you're established, 20 stores across the country, that very iconic Messina wallpaper that you have in the stores that are on the little gelato cups, the music playlist that you mentioned, how instrumental is that? And do you have to evolve that with the times?
A lot of businesses have these, guardrails about what they're about, these all-encompassing one word that describes their business, and, this single originating thought. And we don't really have that. We just have, I think, this innate understanding between the four of us about what we're about and what we're not about. And I think what we are about is super high quality produce, and we're not sure why we're obsessed with that, but, it's why we own dairy farms and strawberry farms and hazelnut farms. It's because we're obsessed with doing everything the best way that we possibly can. And I think we just want the experience to be great, and we want the product to be great. And if you can concentrate on those things, the rest kind of all comes together. We don't really concentrate on the fluff on the outside until we've got the core bit right.
So tell me about that, deciding to buy those supply chains up rather than just, get whatever kind of hazelnuts are coming at you.
I don't know. God, I mean, the hazelnut farm thing was an opportunistic thing as well. It was just a property, the dairy farm, that some of the dairy farmers were trying to get out. And we knew that the dairy farm's a pretty good example, right? Because we knew dairy farmers were trying to get out. They were, this is when the milk price was an all-time low. And we had this opportunity to buy. But one of the things that was great for us is that we didn't have to get a farm gate price, right? We didn't have to sell to the producers to get money for our milk. Even if it cost us $2.50 to produce a litre of milk, we could sustain that because we would value add. We would value add to this product, this milk, and turn it into something else and then sell it, which, dairy farmers don't have that ability, and they don't really think like that. And it's not that they're stupid or anything. It's just that a lot of them are intergenerational farmers, and what they do is they produce milk and they milk their cows 3 times a day. They get as much milk as they can and they sell it to processors. And we don't do that. We can milk them once a day, get a high quality product, cost us probably 3 times the amount we could buy it for, but we make an amazing product.
Of course, the pandemic has been the other curveball that so many businesses have had to struggle against. And when Messina is all about the vibe and the physical presence, how has the pandemic affected the business?
I mean, yeah, look, I think everyone's been through this. I don't really like the word pivot, but you do have to work out what you're going to do. I mean, there was a time when that first lockdown came and everyone had sort of left the office, and just Nick and I were sitting in there for like a week going, what the hell are we going to do? And, we thought we were, onto this thing that was going to be for the rest of our lives. And we thought this could all come crashing down really fast. And so we had to just work out what we were going to do. We had to work out if we had enough money to pay people. We had to work out if people can't come into we didn't even know if we had to close the shops, It turns out that we didn't, but everyone was shutting down. No one knew if it was all restaurants, it was takeaways. And then slowly but surely you just had to make sure you had enough money to keep the lights on. And then slowly but surely you did the pivoting where you went, okay, we've got to do more delivery. We've got to do all these products that people wouldn't normally get from us, but we can make exciting and people will want to, take home because they're in lockdown and they want something exciting to do and all those things. So it's been an incredible challenge.
Has it worked? I mean, has the delivery worked?
Yeah, it has. I mean, I think to be fair, we're doing okay, but we're not profitable in the way that we were before because, when you do delivery, there's 20-30% goes to the delivery guys. You've got huge amounts of packaging, styrofoam, cardboard boxes, and those bigger items, a 1.5 litre tub of gelato is nowhere near as profitable. And to be fair, we've always priced those things at a really reasonable rate because we thought we'd never really sell that many of them, just make them good. So, our turnover's been pretty good, and it means that we've paid our bills. We haven't had to let anyone go. So, we've done pretty well.
And how much have the other stores, outside in Melbourne and Sydney, which has had the longest lockdown period, have the other stores been able to sort of prop up the shutdowns in those cities?
I mean, yes. I mean, we've been pretty lucky, apart from the most recent one. Whenever things went into lockdown, when Melbourne went into their first big lockdown, Sydney wasn't in lockdown. And then when Sydney first went into lockdown, Melbourne wasn't in lockdown. And when, I think Brisbane has stayed out of lockdown, we've always had this little chunk somewhere where we're all right. And in the cities where there wasn't lockdown, it's, when people come out of lockdown, things go gangbusters, right? So we've just never had that holy grail since COVID where everything's out of lockdown. So we're still waiting for that moment. But like I said, we've done pretty well. Like I said, we haven't had to put anyone off. We've only had to close one store temporarily, which was at the Star Casino because the whole casino had closed. So, yeah.
You turned 50 this year, and I guess those big birthdays with a 0 on the end can make us quite, reflective. So what kind of things have you been thinking about? And I guess what has that big number brought up for you in terms of where you want to go next?
They are reflective times. I think they're really, I think you tend to look back and go, did I even imagine that I would be here? And every time I turn one of those, 4050, I'm further from anywhere I ever thought I was going to be, good or bad, But I don't really know. I think, yeah, God, I've been like this my whole life. I don't know where I'm heading. I don't know what's next. But we've got a great business, and I've had terrible business relationships before, and I'm now in this, it's like a long marriage where my business partners and I all know, we don't always get on, but most of the time we do, and we're in a pretty good place, and we respect each other, and that's a pretty good place to be. So don't. Sometimes you just go, I'm not going anywhere else because the grass is probably not greener on the other side.
It's great that the foursome is so strong, and I think you've all learnt so much from previous businesses. But as any entrepreneur knows, it's also really hard to keep all the relationships in your life healthy at the same time as your business. You've just gone through a bit of a personal change. Do you think running your own business had an impact?
I don't think so. I think one of the hardest things about going through like a relationship breakup and the business stuff is not letting each one affect itself. Like I would have bad days at home, and then it would impact how I was with my staff at work, or vice versa, and sometimes you just got to try and keep a big lid on it. But it's really hard to separate those things. If you're feeling depressed, or you're feeling angry, or you're feeling whatever it is, it does translate to whatever else you're doing in the day. But I have found recently that I feel, when things aren't great, I've had COVID, my dad passed away a year and a half ago, so my mum hasn't been great. I'm going through a relationship breakdown. I'm doing pretty good, all things considered, but you feel like you're like this coiled spring, and if you have one small thing go bad, it can really affect you. It can really bring you really down.
And some people run or box, some people talk, go into therapy. Like what's your go-to for trying to process what's going on both in the business and in your personal life?
I started doing pottery.
Really?
Yeah, I started doing pottery. I train quite hard. Like I do a lot of exercise, and that's always really great. I think that's great for everyone to have that sort of outlet. I do all sorts of things just to try and, you have to take your mind out of that space for at least a little part of the day. I think exercise is a really, really good thing to do.
One of the things that strikes me about your story, because there's so many twists and turns in it, and there are so many moments of a mere mortal will completely fall apart if their business goes bankrupt or they go belly up, or, and you've had that happen multiple times, and yet you've kept going. What is it, or what's your advice to people who have to deal with curveball after curveball? Like, what do you think it is that's made Declan Lee keep going?
It gets easier. The more you fail, the easier it gets, without a doubt. And I think people get scared of failing. And I know this is a thing that anyone that is entrepreneurial will say to you. But every time you lose all your money, it becomes easier the next time you lose all your money, because you know that you can pick yourself up. And to people that don't do that, it's hard, right? People just go, I don't know how you do that. I just work my job and I get my salary and I'm good. But it just gets easier, and you realise that it's not as bad as you think it's going to be. As long as you've got a good head about you in terms of respecting people and you're not doing anything bad, and you're the one that's copying it, then you can deal with that.
And what's the one thing that you'd still like to achieve with Messina? It might be a flavour, a store somewhere, a soundtrack you want to put in.
Look, we would like to be successful overseas. We think we make a product that is head and shoulders above pretty much anyone else in the world, and we truly believe in that. We think we've got a concept that will resonate with people in other territories, and we think we can do that. That's important to us. We're talking about, we'd love to have some sort of product, whether it's in the chocolate world, because we produce our own chocolate, or in the gelato world that becomes, like I don't know how I would describe it, like a Nutella or something that just everybody knows.
Ubiquitous.
Yes, ubiquitous, and people know it, and it's a really comfy. We just love to have that product, or a chocolate bar that is, like I don't even know if this is the type of thing, but like a Mars bar or something where it's just this thing that's a legacy that stands the test of time and becomes, when we retire from this business, or if our kid, we always thought that our kids would take over. We want to have some stuff in the market where it's just, it's never going anywhere and everyone loves it. I think Ferrero have done a really good job with that, the Ferrero Rocher and the Nutella and that sort of stuff. We'd love to have something like that.
Well, I think if there's 4 guys who are going to do it, it's probably the Messina guys.
I hope so.
Thank you so much for your time on Curveball, Declan Lee.
It's a pleasure.
Declan Lee, one of 4 owners of Messina Gelato. And he's been a DJ, a music promoter, a physiotherapist, a restaurateur, even lost money trying to get a TV show off the ground. Curveball's made by global podcast production company Dead Set Studios, and you can find more about the podcast at curveballshow.com. And there's a whole stack of great leaders and entrepreneurs who tell the story of their curveball moments, those times when they had to deal on the fly with something they just couldn't see coming. It's right there in your podcast feed. There's Kate Vale, who was employee number 1 for Google Australia. She takes you inside the famous gruelling recruitment process at Google. And if you haven't already heard it, you must check out Olivia Humphrey, who took her streaming platform Canopy from startup to global juggernaut, eventually selling for a 9-figure sum.
I realised that I was changing as a leader. Up until that point, I think sometimes the fear of failure, the big challenges that arose, I channeled into more of a challenge mindset, and I realised my challenge mindset morphed into the opposite, sort of more of a threat mindset. And I started getting a bit scared about losing everything.
Olivia Humphrey of Canopy. That 2-part episode is in your podcast feed right now. This episode of Curveball was edited by Liam Reardon and Justin Rulon. The executive producers are me and Rachel Fountain, who just, by the way, at the height of her dazzling career producing breakfast radio, once got Messina ice cream delivered from their shop, which was situated at the bottom of her own apartment building. Good on you, Rach.